Welcome back to Tetrakan Super Monoblock. This video is going to be about this guy, the Portastudio 414 Mark II. I decided in advance of making this video that the thumbnail was going to say the most overpriced Portastudio. Let's deal with that bit of clickbait straight away. I am not suggesting that this is not a good Portastudio. It is, and I am not suggesting that at the time that it was manufactured that this was badly priced by Tascam. What I'm referring to is at the time of making this video, these are really expensive to buy. I mean, most Tascam Portastudios are pretty expensive considering their obsolete technology, but this one in particular is expensive to buy, and I think that's because of star power. Basically, if you've done any kind of searching for 4-track cassette recorders, Portastudios, whatever on YouTube, something you're likely to have come across because the YouTube algorithm is going to show it to you is a video about the keyboard player from Nine Inch Nails using one of these in part of his live set, and then Reverb did a follow-up video where he's demonstrating the technique in more detail, where basically he's got the 4 pads from a warm place, the 4 chords in the chord progression on the 4 sliders, and those videos have done a lot to create a resurgence in popularity of Portastudios in general. But because this was the Portastudio that he uses, I think that people have begun to fetishize this particular model. For those reasons, I've regularly seen working or service units like this fetch the same sort of prices as the 424 Mark III, its bigger brother, which has a lot more features, which is kind of crazy. And those working or service units are fetching significantly more money than units which I consider to be broadly equivalent in terms of the feature set, like the 414 Mark I, the original 424 is pretty similar. Even in a faulty condition, these are really expensive, like this one. Really bad nick when I got it. I mean, I've serviced it now, but I paid a lot more for this than I did for most of the 244s that I've bought in a faulty condition. I paid more for it than I paid for a lot of the 424 Mark IIIs that I've bought, albeit a lot of the time when I'm buying those, they come without power adapters and I'm having to wire that up myself. So if you've got your heart set on one of these, you're probably going to have to pay through the nose for it. But imagining you don't have much choice, or you get a reasonable deal on one of these, they are good machines. I will try and put this unit in context with its bigger brothers and sisters and its peers, and generally where it sits in the canon of Tascam Portastudios. So let's talk about the specifications. It's got mechanical buttons, it's high speed only, so the speed of the tape is 3 3/4 inches per second, and obviously you can adjust that to a fair extent using the pitch control here, but it's not a dual speed model. If you had tapes that were recorded on standard cassette recorder or on a Porta 1, which was only the half speed of 1 7/8 inches per second, then those tapes are going to sound very fast. It's got a mechanical counter. It does have a 0 return feature. Basically that means that if you hit rewind when you're at, say here, look, I'm at 41, when it gets to 0 or thereabouts it will stop. It doesn't work in the other direction, so if you were at 997 and then pressed fast forward, it wouldn't stop at 0. It has DBX2 noise reduction. You have the option to turn it off on all 4 channels, on and all 4 channels, or there's sync mode. Sync mode means that channels 1 through 3 have DBX on, but channel 4 it's turned off, and that is so you can send channel 4 out of this socket back here. That allows you to hook it up to various MIDI gear, SMPTE gubbins. Some of those things you need an external box to deal with that, some of those you don't. This monitor switch is going to affect the level you hear through the headphones, and it's going to affect the monitor out, so you can have a separate pair of RCA outs going alongside your line out. What you monitor in your headphones, you can switch whether to include the left-right mix that's coming from this mixer here, but you can also include effect 1, which is this row, effect 2, which is this row, and you can use effect 2 as a tape cue. I'll come to that in a minute. In addition to what you may be monitoring through these inputs here or these inputs here, or playing back from tape, you can introduce 2 stereo signals via 2 sockets here, and they've got independent controls here. So I mean, you could use that in conjunction with the sync mode. So if you're using channel 4 to send some kind of synchronization data to external audio, then you can bring two stereo devices that are connected in that way and blend them in with what's coming in with the mixer here, and it'll all come out of the line out sockets and from the headphone socket. Having a look at the mixer here, got a high shelf and a low shelf EQ on all four of the channels. There's no mid control on this one. And then we have effect sends. These effect sends are linked to two output sockets here at the back of the unit. In terms of getting those affected signals back into the unit, then we do have to use these stereo inputs. You can see that the way it's labelled here, that the tip ring sleeve configuration of these two sockets is opposite to each other. What that means is that while you can put like a TRS stereo jack in here to introduce a stereo signal into each of those inputs, if you just use standard tip ring sockets to come back from an effects unit, then one of these inputs is going to be automatically panned hard left and one's going to be panned hard right. That means you can, say, channel 1, place it within the stereo field depending on how you set these. So like if you turn that all the way up and all the way down, then your affected signal is going to be panned here. Whereas if you turn that one all the way down and that one all the way up, then your effect's going to be here. If you turn them up both equally, then your affected signal is going to be in the center, and that works independently of the pan control on the channel. So you could have like dry guitar over here and the reverberation over on this side in the stereo field. I said I'd come back to this tape cue. When you're recording, say you're coming in through this input socket here, one of these ones back here, I'll get to them, then the fader is part of the gain structure. And what I mean is, in addition to this trim control that's like putting the amount of gain on the input signal, if you have that fader set between 7 and 8, you see there's a dotted mark beside that. That's unity gain. You can actually get a bit of boost from the op amps either side of this fader by pushing that fader all the way up, and then you're cutting the signal that's coming from the preamp when you have it lower than that. And then all of that is affected in a similar way by the master fader. So if you turn the master fader up like that, the op amps either side of it are actually boosting the signal slightly. That's unity gain in terms of what is being received at the stereo bus from the mixer channels, and that's cutting the signal. The point I'm making here is that how these three controls are set has an effect on the gain structure, and it's usually not a good idea to listen to what you're recording while you record it in a way that is affected by the gain structure. So one of the best ways to work while recording with this is to have that button depressed, set this switch to tape cue. Then what's happening here is you're going to have a monaural mix in your headphones of the 4 channels that's completely independent of what's happening with these mixer faders and with this master fader. That allows you to set the gain structure in a way that's optimal for what's being received by tape, but then set what you're hearing in a way that's optimal for your ears depending on what you're recording. And then later on you can switch that back to effect 2 and use that as an effect return when you're in the mixing stage of your recording workflow. Pan controls during mixdown, that sets where the individual 4 tracks of the cassette sit in the stereo field. During recording, this can make a difference depending on how this record arm switch is set. If you put these switches up the way so that it goes to the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, then there's a direct signal coming out of the base of the fader, ignoring the pan control altogether, and it's going straight to the corresponding track on the cassette. However, you can also set it so this channel is going to the left bus, and if you do that, then this becomes almost like a volume control. If that's set to left and this is turned all the way to the right, then no signal is going to hit the tape, and it's going to be at maximum volume to the left like that. The point of having that facility is to do with bouncing. Let's say that you recorded bongo drums. I never use bongo drums, I don't own any. An acoustic guitar, I don't really like acoustic guitar. And an acoustic bass guitar, don't have one of them either. And you want to blend them onto one channel so that you've got another 3 channels left for falsetto vocals. I don't really sing in falsetto. And what we can do is set all these so they're safe and put the input to tape and turn them all to the right. So these 3 channels are going to be summed on the right hand side of the stereo bus, and then we record on the right side of this one. Basically the 3 of these channels are going to be combined in this channel, then you could record over the original material here. These you can either have it so this is controlling the sound coming back from the tape, or it's coming from guitar. Guitar is a separate input back here with a separate gain control. Got a little impedance transformer in it, so it's good for passive guitar pickup. Electric guitar with absolutely no processing on it doesn't sound all that good to me, but what do I know? A much more realistic application, I suppose, is bass. Bass sounds pretty good without amp processing, though usually you've got way too much low end, so you'd have to turn that down. But anyway, you've got that facility. And then there's the mic line input. So your mic line input there along the front, which is kind of convenient. If that's down there and fader set for unity gain, then you should get a line level signal. And then you can boost the gain if you're using dynamic mic or whatever. There are these XLR sockets. Again, there's a little daughter board in here with an impedance transformer that allows you to plug in balanced cables, so you get the benefit of slightly better noise reduction, or you don't have to use an adapter if that's the kind of cable and microphone that you have. Got a sub input here, so I suppose you could do something like put a drum machine in here and use the master volume on your drum machine to control how loud you hear it to the left-right bus in your headphones, so you could use that as a guide while recording. There's a remote punch in out, so you can use the kind of stomp box you use to change amplifier channels or whatever to engage and disengage the record function. Let's talk a little bit about which units are similar to this. Obviously the 414, its predecessor, is similar. What the 414 lacks is just this section here. Unless you're going to record direct bass, I would suggest that you don't particularly need that. I know it's nice to have XLR sockets, it's not super essential, so I don't actually think that this is that much better than the 414 unless you really like blue plastic. The 424, the original one, the sort of grey Star Wars toy looking one, is pretty similar. You can see it's a bit bigger. I don't know if that gives you some impression of the scale. Big difference between this unit and the 424 is the 424 is not only double speed, it's the only 4-track cassette player that I'm aware of that has 3 speeds. This unit become associated with this instrument-like quality where you've got 4 pads on the 4 faders. And for me, a big part of that is being able to change the pitch, like change the granularity of the sound. If you put it at half speed, it becomes grainy. If you record at half speed and then put it up to high speed, then it becomes kind of warbly and chattery. And the 44 does that a bit better because you've got the 3 speed options and they're, you know, an octave apart. So from a sound design, fiddle around with the texture of tape loops point of view, I would actually say that the 424 is a better option than this. And it may not remain that way, but it's kind of cheaper to get hold of. The Porter 07 is a really similar machine to this. It's got the same transport in it, in fact. Very similar facilities in terms of effects, EQ, outputs. It's also high speed only. And that's a unit you can get for significantly cheaper than this if you're not bothered about how it looks. The relative shortcomings of this: there's no rehearsal facilities. This whole zero return thing's a pretty primitive form of the kind of memory control you have on like 464, 424 Mark II, 44 Mark III. I kind of miss a mid control sometimes. My favourite of all the EQs in Tascam Portastudios is the 2-band parametric mids that were on the 246 and the 244. It would be lovely to have them and a high and low shelf 4-band EQ basically, but given the choice I would rather have the mid bands than the high low. Kind of depends what you're doing, I suppose. The effects return here, just having a level control, that's a little bit primitive. It's nice to be able to place those independently in the stereo field and to be able to EQ them separately. You have that facility on a 464 and a 424 Mark II and Mark III, but not this one. A lot of people are going to want to put the music that they're making into the digital domain at some point, if only to put it on Bandcamp or share it on their Facebook page or whatever. And it can be nice to capture the idiosyncrasies of the cassette medium in the digital domain, but do all your mixing in a digital audio workstation. It's a little bit awkward to capture because there's slight irregularities in speed because the motor isn't perfect. Successive passes will be a slightly different length, so you must capture all 4 tracks simultaneously. What you have to do is put tracks 1 and 2 panned hard left and right coming out of your line outs, send one of the tracks to the tape out, the other track to another tape out. Then all 4 tracks are kind of passing through the mixer. You're not capturing just the raw output of the cassette in the same way that you would do if you had direct tape outs. And just to make it absolutely clear what I'm talking about, here's a 424 Mark III. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 separate outputs, and that's coming directly from the cassette without passing through the mixer and effect bus in any way. On the plus side, it's quite small and portable. So if you're doing that kind of like stuff on a desk genre where you've got umpteen pedals and dictaphones and samplers and drum machines and modular synths arranged on a table and you're dollish jamming, then this is good just because it doesn't take up much real estate. It's got a small footprint. I do think it looks cool, and it's certainly less of a compromise than smaller units. Say this Porto 3, I mean that's really a very primitive, very limited machine. I mean, they did one that's more or less the same as this, but it looks like this, called the Porto 2 Mark II. It's got the blue plastic, but you know, I would certainly rather have this one. Before closing the video up, I guess the final thing to say about this is just draw attention to how difficult or easy this is to maintain or to fix. This isn't a unit I've worked on a lot compared to some of the other ones I feature on my channel. This is maybe the 3rd or 4th one I've had in my possession. The first couple was just belt changes and so on that I did. They're easy to disassemble. Some Portastudios, and I'm thinking for example of X44, there's several levels of disassembly that you need to go through before you can even change the belt. This isn't like that. There's a few screws to remove. There's no plate in the back of the transport if you need to change the belts. It's really easy. I've done videos on that, by the way, so check out my channel if you want to see that. It's pretty easy to get at the mixer for cleaning and so on. I don't know a lot of the ins and outs about fixing these electrically. I don't see any particular reason for those aspects of repair to be any more difficult on this. Everything's on pretty much on 2 boards. That's got some advantages and some disadvantages. You can't Frankenstein together one working unit from modular parts like you can on a 244, and I suppose it's more difficult to isolate an electrical problem on a single board than it would be on something like a 244, but I don't have any particular reason to think that it's more liable to electrical failure. The only thing that I am aware of at this stage is that these short faders for gain trim, they're pretty rare. I mean, I'm talking about rarity, scarcity in terms of I fix a lot of Portastudio, so I've got a lot of spares kicking around. So if I have a bad fader on a 44 Mark II, then there's like a bunch of donor machines I can go to find a replacement, whereas really you need another 414 or 424 as a donor if you need to replace these. Apart from that, I don't see any real disadvantage from a repair point of view of getting one of these. So yeah, in summary, it is a really good machine. It's pricey at the moment for what it is. A Porta 07 is probably a cheaper way of getting the same facilities. If you're going for that sound design kind of thing, then I would say that the 424 is better because it's got the speed control. But yeah, it does look cool, it is compact, and I hope this video helped you kind of make an informed decision if you're thinking about getting one of these. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more summaries, repair videos, demonstrations, recording techniques, all that stuff.